The rain had been falling for 3 days, and Cora Blackwell had been walking for 2 of them. She did not know where she was. She knew she had left Prescott heading east, because east was away from the boarding house, where the landlady had locked her out for missing 2 weeks of rent, and away was the only direction that mattered. She had 17 cents in her pocket and a carpetbag with a change of clothes and her mother's Bible and a tintype of her parents that was getting wet because the carpetbag was not waterproof, and neither was she. She was 26 years old. She had come to Arizona Territory from Ohio the previous spring to take a position as a telegraph operator, and the position had lasted exactly 4 months before the telegraph office closed because the mining company that funded it went bankrupt. After that, she had worked at the boarding house, cooking, cleaning, washing, in exchange for a room, and when the boarding house filled up with miners from the new strike and the landlady needed the room for a paying customer, Cora had been given 12 hours to leave. She had not eaten since yesterday morning. The rain was cold for October, not freezing but close, and her dress was soaked through, and her boots were full of water, and her hands had stopped shaking an hour ago, which she knew from her father's medical books was not a good sign. Hypothermia begins with shaking. When the shaking stops, the body has started to give up. She saw the ranch house through the rain at about 4 in the afternoon, though she was not certain of the time because the sky was the same color it had been all day, a flat, heavy gray that sat on the mountains like a lid. The house was low and solid, built of rough-cut timber with a covered porch and a stone chimney that was putting out smoke. There was a barn behind it and a corral with horses standing miserable in the rain, and a dog on the porch that lifted its head and watched her approach with more curiosity than alarm. She made it to the porch steps. She put her hand on the rail and pulled herself up the first step, and the second step, and then her legs gave out, and she sat down hard on the wet boards, and then she was lying on her side with her cheek against the planks, and the rain drumming on the porch roof above her, and the dog's nose against her hand, warm and wet, and everything went gray. Sawyer Crane heard the dog bark, a single sharp bark, the one Jess used for strangers, and came to the door and found a woman lying on his porch in the rain. She was soaked through and shivering. No, not shivering, which was worse, and her face was the color of candle wax, and her lips were blue, and she was holding a carpetbag against her chest, the way a drowning person holds a piece of wood. He did not hesitate. He picked her up. She weighed nothing, or close to it, and carried her inside and laid her on the rug in front of the fire, and pulled off her wet boots, and wrapped her in the wool blanket from his bed, and put more wood on the fire, and knelt beside her, and said, "Can you hear me?" Her eyes opened. They were dark brown, almost black, and they were full of the dazed confusion of someone who has been pushed past their limits and does not yet understand that they have stopped moving. "You are safe," Sawyer said. "You are in my house. My name is Sawyer Crane. You collapsed on my porch." She tried to speak and could not. He brought her water and held the cup while she drank, and then he went to the kitchen and heated broth from the pot on the stove. Elk broth, rich and dark, left from last night's supper, and brought it to her in a tin cup, and held it while she drank that too. The color came back to her face slowly, like dawn coming up through cloud. "Cora," she said finally. "Cora Blackwell. Are you hurt?" "No, just cold and hungry, and I do not know where I am. You are 12 miles east of Prescott. This is the Crane Ranch." She closed her eyes. 12 miles. She had walked 12 miles in 2 days in the rain without food, and she had ended up on a stranger's porch, and the stranger had carried her inside, and wrapped her in his blanket, and fed her broth, and she did not know whether to be grateful or ashamed. "You do not need to be ashamed," Sawyer said, as if he had read her face. "You need to be warm. We will sort out the rest in the morning." He gave her the bedroom. He slept in the main room by the fire, in the chair, with the dog at his feet and his rifle across his knees, not because he expected trouble, but because it was habit, the habit of a man who had lived alone for 3 years on a ranch at the end of a road and had learned to sleep light. Sawyer Crane was 34 years old. He had bought the ranch with his Army discharge pay after 5 years of service, and had built the house and the barn and the corral with his own hands. And he ran 40 head of cattle and a small remuda, and he did it alone, because he preferred alone. His wife Margaret had died in childbirth 3 years ago, and the baby with her, and Sawyer had folded that grief into the walls of the house, and the posts of the corral, and the daily work of keeping the ranch alive. And he had not spoken about it to anyone, and he did not intend to. He had grown accustomed to the quiet. He had grown accustomed to eating alone at the table Margaret had helped him build, to sleeping in the bed Margaret had shared, to walking through rooms that still held the shape of her absence even after 3 years. He had not removed her things. Her apron still hung on the hook by the stove. Her hairbrush was still on the dresser. The cradle he had built, the one that had never been used, was in the corner of the bedroom, covered with a horse blanket, because he could not look at it, but could not bring himself to burn it. The ranch kept him busy enough that the grief did not eat him alive, but it was always there, underneath the work, the way a stone sits at the bottom of a well, invisible until you reach deep enough to touch it. In the morning, the rain had stopped and the sky was washed clean, and Cora came out of the bedroom in her dried dress with her hair braided and her color back, and she looked like a different person, still thin, still tired, but upright and steady, and looking at him with those dark eyes that were clear now and direct. "I should go," she said. "Where?" She opened her mouth and closed it. She had nowhere to go. She had 17 cents and a wet carpetbag, and no job, and no family closer than Ohio, and Ohio was 2,000 miles and a lifetime away. Sawyer poured her coffee. He set a plate of eggs and biscuits in front of her. He sat across the table and ate his own breakfast and said, without looking up, "I need help with the ranch. The fencing needs work, and the barn needs cleaning, and the kitchen needs someone who can cook better than I can, which is not a high standard. I can pay room and board and $2 a week. You do not know me. You collapsed on my porch in the rain, and the first thing you said when you woke up was your name. That tells me what I need to know." "What does it tell you?" "That you are honest. A dishonest person makes excuses. An honest person introduces herself." Cora looked at the eggs and the biscuits and the coffee, and the solid, quiet man across the table, who was offering her work and shelter without pity or expectation, and she said, "I will stay." She was good at the work. She was good at everything, it turned out. Not with the showy competence of someone trying to prove herself, but with the quiet efficiency of a woman who had been taking care of things since she was old enough to hold a broom. She cleaned the barn and mended the fence, and cooked meals that made Sawyer close his eyes when he ate, because he had not tasted food this good since Margaret died, and the taste of it brought back something he had thought was gone. She was also good with the horses. She had grown up on a farm in Ohio, and she knew how to handle an animal. And when the bay mare threw a shoe, Cora picked up the hoof and examined it and said, "The frog is bruised. She needs a poultice, not a new shoe." And Sawyer looked at her and thought, "Where did you come from?" By the 3rd week, she had reorganized the pantry, restocked the woodpile, and patched the hole in the barn wall that had been letting the wind through since September. She had also, without being asked, moved Margaret's apron from the hook by the stove to the top shelf of the hall closet. Not thrown away, not hidden, but put in a place that was respectful and out of the daily line of sight. Sawyer noticed and said nothing, and was grateful in a way he could not have explained if she had asked. She did not ask. She understood, without being told, that this house was full of a dead woman's memory, and that the memory was not her enemy, but her predecessor, and she treated it the way she treated everything, with care and practicality and an absence of drama that Sawyer found both surprising and deeply comforting. She did not try to replace Margaret. She simply moved into the spaces Margaret had left empty and filled them with her own warmth and competence, and the steady, quiet presence of a woman who had learned to make herself useful because the alternative was to be discarded, and she was not a woman who accepted discard. Sawyer watched her the way he watched the weather, constantly, carefully, with a growing awareness that something was changing that he could not control. He noticed the way she hummed while she cooked, a low, tuneless sound that filled the kitchen the way heat fills a room. He noticed the way she talked to the dog, full conversations, as if Jess were a person with opinions. He noticed the way she read her mother's Bible at the table every evening, her lips moving silently, her finger tracing the lines, and the way she closed it gently and pressed her hand flat on the cover before she put it away, the way you touch something you love. The weeks turned into months. October cooled into November, and November froze into December, and the ranch settled into a rhythm that felt, to both of them, like something they had not known they were missing. Sawyer talked more. Not a lot. He was not a talking man, but enough. He told her about the army and about the ranch and about the mountains in winter and the way the elk came down to the valley when the snow got deep. He told her about Jess the dog, who was half wolf and smarter than most people. He did not tell her about Margaret. Not yet. Cora talked more too. She told him about Ohio and the telegraph office and the boarding house and the 2 days of walking in the rain. She told him about her father, who had been a country doctor, and her mother, who had taught her to cook and sew and stand up straight. She told him these things at the kitchen table in the evenings while the fire burned low, and Jess slept on the rug, and the mountains stood black against the stars outside the window, and Sawyer listened the way he did everything, carefully, completely, with his full attention. On Christmas Eve, she made a pie from dried apples she had found in the pantry, and Sawyer came in from the barn and smelled it, and stood in the doorway and looked at her, and the pie and the lamplit kitchen, and said, "Cora." "Yes." "I have not had pie at Christmas in 3 years." "I know. My wife used to make apple pie." It was the first time he had mentioned Margaret. Cora set the pie on the table and turned to face him and said, "Tell me about her." He told her. He sat at the kitchen table and told her about Margaret and the baby, and the night they died and the 3 years of silence that followed. And Cora listened without speaking and without touching him, because she understood that what he needed was not comfort, but witness. Someone to hear the thing he had been carrying alone and acknowledge that it was real and heavy and worth the telling. When he was finished, she said, "Thank you for telling me. Thank you for asking." They ate the pie in silence, and the silence was not empty. It was the kind of silence that comes after something important has been said, full, settling, like the ground after rain. In January, the snow came hard, and they were snowed in for a week, and they discovered that being trapped together was not difficult. It was, in fact, the easiest thing either of them had done in a long time. They read by the fire and played cards and talked and did not talk. And Cora taught Jess to shake hands, and Sawyer laughed, really laughed, the kind of laugh that starts in the belly and goes all the way up. And Cora heard it and thought, that is the sound I came 12 miles in the rain to find. I just did not know it at the time. On the last day of January, with the snow still deep and the fire burning, and Jess asleep between them, Sawyer said, "I do not want to pay you $2 a week anymore." Cora's face went still. "You want me to leave?" "I want you to stay. Not as a hired hand, as—" He stopped. He looked at his hands. "I am not good at this. You are better at it than you think. Cora, I carried you inside off my porch 4 months ago, and I did not know your name, and I would do it again tomorrow, and the day after that, and every day for the rest of my life, and that is either love or insanity, and I am hoping it is the first one." She laughed. It was a bright, sudden, startled laugh, and she put her hand over her mouth, and then she took it away and said, "It is the first one." They were married in February by the circuit preacher who rode through the valley once a month. Cora wore her Sunday dress, and Sawyer wore a clean shirt, and Jess sat at their feet, and the preacher said the words, and Sawyer kissed her for the first time on the porch, where she had collapsed 4 months ago, and the sun was out, and the mountains were white with snow, and the sky was the kind of deep blue that only comes after a long rain. And Cora thought, I walked 12 miles in the rain and ended up exactly where I was supposed to be. Sometimes the worst road leads to the best door.